how would I treat them different if they were volunteers? Because I tell clients all the time, your best people, they're volunteers. They could leave you and find a better paying position somewhere else tomorrow.
So your job as a leader is to fill the person's void with facts. So sharing, transparency, communication just gives the person facts, and they can react to the facts however they want, but at least they're reacting to facts, not made up stories of what's really happening.
Maui Mastermind presents the Business Coach Podcast, answering your questions and providing real actionable insights for building a better, stronger, more profitable business without sacrificing your time, life, or freedom anymore.
Well, welcome to another episode of The Business Coach. I'm your host, David Finkel. I want to welcome you to this week's episode. I have a real treat in store for you. So we're going to be talking about how can you inspire, engage, and align your team. And I'm joined this week by Maui business coach, Jen Frigault. Now, Jen is someone who's had 2 decades working with companies from large cap companies to mid cap companies to coaching small or micro businesses, the full gamut. She is fantastic. And the two of us are talking first about what's the opposite. We invert the question on its head. What causes companies to have teams that are uninspired or disengaged or misaligned? And when we take from those root causes of these bad things, we then go to how do we align companies the right way? How do we engage them? We talk in there about this principle of what would it mean to your company if you treated all your employees not as worker bees, but truly as paid volunteers. To take a lesson out of nonprofits, right? Over $1 trillion per year are donated services and value economically in the United States. That's just the United States, let alone around the world. What causes or sparks these people? We talk about how can you help your people have a sense of engagement and connection and involvement and growth through what you do, and the other non-financial ways that people feel inspired and engaged with what you do. We talk in there about what are the red and the yellow lights that warn you that you have a disengaged worker, and that can cost you big. We also go in there about how can we share information intelligently? What about non-financial information? And also about what types of financial information should we or should we not share? In the story, we'll give you 6 concrete examples of client businesses where we've applied these principles to increase engagement, to inspire, and to align the team around a common set of goals, so that the company can grow faster, more profitably, and everybody wins. I think you're going to love it. You're going to walk away with at least 1 or 2 concrete ideas. With that said, welcome to this week's episode of The Business Coach, where my guest is business coach, Maui business coach, Jen Frigault. Well, Jen, thank you. Welcome back to The Business Coach. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So I know that one of your daughters is just about to finish up high school. The other one's just about to finish college. Now, so that means you're about 5 years ahead of parenting of where my kids are right now. I'm curious, before we get started on today's topic about how to inspire, engage, and align our team, could you give me any coaching advice about this next? David, here's what's coming next when that first pair, because I have twins, head off to college for you.
I would say, have wine. I'm kidding. Planning. So it's good that I am a business coach by trade, because that planning ahead and organization has been serving me well, especially as I'm navigating one daughter who's job searching and one daughter who's trying to figure out colleges and all of that. So that has saved my sanity, although driven them slightly crazy.
I love that. Thank you for that. So today we're going to talk about inspiring, engaging, and aligning your team. And I know that's something you have a deep well of experiences with. I guess I'll start off by asking this question for both of us here. What does it look like when a team is uninspired, disengaged, and misaligned? Let's maybe break that and unpack that for a little bit. What are the clues that tell us that we have a team that is really out of whack? Like if we were mechanics and we ran the diagnostic machine on the team that we have, what warning lights would pop up that would tell us we've got uninspired, disengaged, and misaligned?
I think there's a lot of warning signs. I'd say that the bright red warning sign is retention issues. You have team members that are leaving, sometimes at a rapid pace. So that's kind of the too late warning sign for sure. Some of the other ones are, how are they showing up to conversations? Are they contributing ideas? Are they showing up to meetings and not saying anything? Is their work delayed? Are they not communicating with each other? Do you start to see cracks in the systems, meaning communication, productivity, customer service? Start to notice the cracks that are happening.
So I'm hearing you. The first one is this warning light that's too late from, you got team leaving, and that makes sense. I was talking with one of our coaching clients. He'd been a client for, I want to say about eight or 9 years. And he had taken his business and he had tripled the revenue and 5x profit. And he was really happy. And he ended up having this guy who he had put in place to manage his entire field team. He was a service business. He had a crew of, I think it was close to like 20 different people that would go out and do work in the field. Some of whom were employees, some of whom were contractors that kind of filled in the gaps. And in around a 30-day period, he had 3 of his very best field people give notice. And these were guys that had, 20 years experience. I won't say irreplaceable, but really difficult, the body of knowledge that they had. These were guys that had been with him for over a decade. And he was really shocked. And when he talked with them, what he learned was the person that he put in charge managing was really good to schedule, really good with the spreadsheets, but had no social or emotional intelligence, which is horrible with his team members, and was really just upsetting them. And it had been going on for a while. And what came out of that for him was, thankfully, he was able to save 2 of them. But what he learned for him was that, number one, he had the wrong person in that role. But besides that, he learned that in future, he'll never fully delegate the relationship with his key people, that he always needs a second point of contact. And I look at this, this in the Maui community. We've got several client businesses that do high alpine training. So, rock climbing or avalanche training for the military or some of the businesses. And they'll always talk about always having 3 points of contact with the wall. We're not going to just hold on to the rock face with one hand and one grip. We're going to have a second point of contact or a third point of contact. And so his lesson that he took, and this would be good for anyone in our audience, how can I make sure that I have other informal lines of connection with multiple people talking with our key team members, not just the one that I've delegated management to, but I can still maintain some of that relationship. So I have that. I like that. Does that spark anything for you as you hear me say that?
It does. And I love that kind of analogy of the rock wall. I think that's a good one. And it does. I think the biggest mistake that business owners often make, especially ones, more in the early or start to, grow phase, so to speak, is not realizing that their employees don't want to be workers. They want to be team members. These are companies. They're not, hourly workers showing up to, the fast food joint, in high school. They want to be part of a team. They want to be developed. They want that engagement. And a lot of owners don't make that connection soon enough, and they start to see the issues.
As you say that, this idea that they want to be part of a team versus just a worker, I liken it this. I remember I was interviewing somebody for one of the books I wrote, Freedom Formula, and we were talking in there about charities. Every year in the United States, $1 trillion plus of economic output is donated to various charities. And these are people who are unpaid. How do I, as a person who runs a charity? And I was talking with a friend of mine who had done some work for Maui. His name was Joel. And Joel was now in his about 10th year of running a church that he was the pastor for. And we were talking about, how does he get his people to get out there and clean up the parking lot on Sunday morning or on Saturday afternoon? He was also in Virginia. So summertime is hot in Virginia and it's muggy. So how does he get these 20 or 30 people to make this wonderful way? And these are all volunteers doing that. Why? Because there was a sense of purpose, a sense of engagement. And so I like to think about it sometimes as if I had a team, a company, not of employees, but of volunteers. Now, paid volunteers, of course, how would I treat them differently if they were volunteers? Because I tell clients all the time, your best people, they're volunteers. They could leave you and find a better paying position somewhere else tomorrow. So what keeps them, what retains them is not just the money part. It's going to be meaning. It's going to be purpose. It's going to be engagement. It's going to be growth. It's going to be intangibles. We have to get money close, right? We can't be perfect. We have to be fair. It's a marker of respect and how they're seen, but we're not going to win with money. We just can lose with money. We can't win with it. I'm curious, how do we give purpose, meaning, growth? How do we give those other parts? Because I think when you talk about engagement and inspiration, those probably grow out of treating our workers, not as workers, but as volunteers that are there helping fulfill a mission together.
Yeah. And you're point is exactly right. It's not always about the money. And I think that's where a lot of business owners go to immediately. So, I'll give you several examples of what I find to be really successful that have nothing to do with, shelling out more money. I'd say number one is increase transparency and communication with your employees. So by that, I mean the transparency around the company goals and vision, and when appropriate, financial targets, revenue targets, and goals. So examples of that are, share where the company's going, 18 months, 3 years from now, but more break that down. What does it look like right now, this quarter? What are the competitors we're worried about? What are the products that we're investing in? What are the key team members that we're looking to hire? And how do you all fit in? So transparency around that. But also, guess what? We just crossed $1 million in revenue, and you all helped us do that. Next year, we're going for 2 million, and here's all the things we're going to do. Share those goals. So number one, transparency and communication. Number two is breaking it down into a quarterly breakdown. Within Maui, we have a quarterly process, of course, but it's not just for the business owner all the time. It can be really important for the key divisions in the company. Having quarterly focus areas, these are the things this quarter that we're going to do to really impact these goals. What are we doing in marketing? What are we doing in sales? What am I doing as the owner? That can be really important. A third thing is feedback loops. What are you doing outside of, quarterly all hands? Are you having one-on-ones? Are you having project debriefs? What went well and what do we want to replicate? What didn't go well and do we want to fix going forward? Are you incentivizing your employees to give ideas to the company? And last thing I'll say on this is develop employee development plans and growth plans. So again, it doesn't always have to mean a title and a raise. It could mean certifications. It could mean training. It could be leads on certain projects. Have discussions with them about how they can grow in their role and how you value their contributions to the company.
There's so much in there. I'm going to unpack some of that together with you. So the first I'm hearing when you talk about increasing transparency and communication, I always like to think about inverting when someone says something. What does it look like the opposite? So if we're talking about, inspiring, engaging, and aligning, we looked before about what does it look like to uninspire and disengage and misalign. So what does it look like, or what's the message that's sent when we're not being transparent? And, employees are human beings. When you don't share, when you're closed, an employee is going to think, I don't feel trusted. I don't feel valued. I don't feel respected. You're telling me I'm not a capable person. Like you can't trust me with that information. So sharing information is a wonderful affirmation. And if I share information with, my 3 main leaders, that's telling them that I trust them. I see them valuable, that they can use that information to help do their role better and make the company more successful. And I respect them enough to know that. Now, we'll get to the financial sharing in a moment, because that one has both flowers and thorns to it, good and bad to it. But there's so much information that an owner could share. And I think many times they don't share it, not because they were fearful. It just never occurs to them that would matter to somebody else. In the press of it, they're so busy jumping from plate A that they're spinning to plate B that they're spinning to plate C and D that they're spinning back to B over to A, that they just don't take a moment for that. And they think, I don't have the time for it. But when I start to build that team and I share goals and targets and progress, it actually saves quite a bit of time. And I'll tell team members all the time, hey, you didn't update on this. Here's why it matters. It does cost time to update. It would have taken you 5 or 10 minutes to do the update. But notice, and I had to follow back up with you, we had a meet about it, and the miscommunication on 2 rounds of emails, you and I have taken over half an hour with what could have been cleared up with an earlier email or an earlier note to the project tool so much before. Before we get to sharing financial information, this idea of, we think, the message it sends when we send it, the message it sends when we don't share it, and why it is so common that business owners don't share it, even though when you approach them with it, they know it would be a good idea. Does that spark anything for you, Jen?
It does. And I have a quote, and I'm blanking on who this quote is attributed to, but it is, in the absence of facts, we tell ourselves stories. And that is a quote that I share a lot with my clients that are not so great at communicating, because what happens is when we don't have facts, and you can relate this to news story or celebrity gossip, you see something, but you don't have facts. So we tell ourselves stories about what's really happening. And our brain needs to fill that gap with stories. So your job as a leader is to fill the person's void with facts. So sharing, transparency, communication just gives the person facts, and they can react to the facts however they want, but at least they're reacting to facts, not made up stories of what's really happening. So
I love that. So one of our jobs as a leader is to reduce, fear, uncertainty, doubt, FUD factor. And so by us sharing this information, communicating, giving clarity, transparency to some degree, we're avoiding the fact that no information, they're going to fill that void with something. And why would you want them to roll the dice and take the chance that what they fill it with might be something really unproductive or even outright crazy?
Exactly.
I love that. Let's talk about sharing financial information. And this has some risks with it, right? Financial information can be misunderstood. The beautiful thing about what you said earlier was even just sharing, if here's the goals and targets and we break it down, here's some of the KPIs. And by the way, any of our audience, if you want some of the earlier episodes that we did on key performance indicators, you'll find them here in the archive of the Business Coach. They're fantastic. We did 2 or 3 episodes, including 2 episodes, Jen, that we had Rich Wood, who you'll know as he's the coaching director of Maui Mastermind. He and I were talking about KPIs. So one thing coming back into this idea of sharing information, for example, I'll give a really pedestrian example, then I want you to pick one for yourself. There was a successful dry cleaner that we worked with. They were the dominant dry cleaner in their city, an upscale city in California. They had 3 locations for what they did and a concierge practice that would go pick up and deliver all this kinds of cleaning stuff. And one of the things we were looking at was they really wanted to get more of their customers to become concierge customers. By the way, Jen, they used to call it route customers. And I said, no. You're in an upscale area. You don't have route customers. You're not a blue collar area. You're an area with homes that average in value over $5 million per home. You have a concierge service that will pick up and deliver as part of this value offering. But a concierge client would do 2 to 3 times more volume and would be 3 or 4 times more profitable than an average person that would bring their dry cleaning in or their laundering in. And so if they could take someone who came in with their clothes and convert them to a concierge client, that was a big deal for them. It meant, $1,000 plus per year per person they converted. So, their old way of doing it was just to simply ask the people at the counter, hey, remember to ask them about the concierge level of service. And we said, well, there's no process to it. There's no real thought strategically. So we had them go back and redesign it. So they designed it with a simple question. When, Jen, you would bring your dry cleaning in, they would say, that's wonderful. We're thrilled. It'll be ready on Wednesday. Question for you. Would you like for us to deliver this to your home complimentary? Of course. Wonderful. Let's get you signed up for the concierge level of service. It's a complimentary service we offer for clients like yours. And I think you'll find that it will delight you. And then when they would do that, they would take care of that enrollment, that counter enrollment. They would go back behind where they had a little scoreboard up. They put a little tick mark there. And their target was, how can we get to 50, 75, or 100 of these in a 60-day period? And then they won prizes. The prizes were things like a Sonos sound system to use the plant where they were doing the dry cleaning work, to listen to the music of their choice, or to have a party that they could throw. Their workforce were predominantly in the plant were people who were there for years, but the front counter people tended to be more of a college students because they were a college town. And so they rewarded them with things that these college kids loved. They brought it together with a way that they could visually see it. And the key was they started sharing this information about, why does a concierge level client matter? And how can you see how we're doing at the conversion? And so that they felt part of something. They made it a little bit more engaging with that. I'm curious for you, is there some way that you've seen that this idea of sharing information has helped to really call or engage or pull together a group of employees in a company to be truly a team?
Yes. And I love that example as well. So I have a client, she owns a dance studio. I'll call her Dawn. And Dawn, one of the things Dawn was doing kind of off to the side on her own, and, she was sharing with me as her coaches, this dream she had of making her studio an accredited studio, which brought to it a certain level of prestige. It was a dream. It was a goal she was working on, off to the side. And I didn't realize that no one inside of her business knew about this. And, She was having issues, with retention with her teachers, especially. And, I can get into more details on that as well later. But I suggested to her, in terms of sharing, why don't you share that with your teachers? She was having teachers that were leaving, were turning over again. I think they felt like workers. They didn't feel like team members. They felt like they were hourly paid workers. So shared that. It sparked something with her teachers of, oh, wow, this is going to be a legit business. I'm going to be part of it. It caused them to get more excited about working there because, being a part of an accredited institution looked way better on a resume than working at a local dance studio. And it also inspired them to start asking, how can we help? How can we make this go faster? What can we be doing? So just sharing that goal really started to involve and start to impact the retention issue that she was having. So that was one example.
I think that's fantastic. And this idea really fits back into, I treat a worker like, here's what you do, focus on the task. There's really not a lot given to context or environment, nor to meaning and purpose. Move X to Y, move Y to Z versus here's what you do, how it makes a difference in the lives of a customer or lives of the company. So I like that idea that if we treat them like a volunteer, in a volunteer organization, we have to share information. Hey, here's what our mission is. Here's what our purpose is. Hey, last month we helped serve 4,000 meals to local families, and you were a part of that. So there's a sense of belonging, a sense of identity. These are all things that are so powerful and potent. So one action step for anyone in our audience today is to pause and play in a mental experiment for 30 minutes. What would it be like if you treated your team members, whether it's all of them or at least the best ones, but ideally all of them, like they were volunteers? Now they're paid volunteers, but what would that mean differently? Well, I would probably share certain things. I might have t-shirts that would have them be part with us. I might, have them get a chance to meet some of the customers who they're helping, a way for them to put a face to it versus just, I'm doing this kind of anonymous task. I don't see the reason for it, and I don't see the impact of it. Let's go to money though for a moment. So, some of the risks with sharing information about money, this is the fear I see or hear from business owners. Well, if I told them about that, now they're going to come back and say, I want you to pay me more money. I mean, that's like, if we're being more successful now, everyone's going to come to me for a raise, which I get the fear. And what I tell the owners, I say, first of all, sharing financial information is not a yes or a no, it's a spectrum. I can be on one end sharing none of that information, but I can still share lots of other things that would be valuable, useful, etc. On the opposite end, I could be open books accounting, sharing everything except for probably individual salaries of what people are paid. And there's a lot of space in between. But a starting point might be, if I've got key managers or key leaders, and I share some of the financial information with them in such a way that I combine that with financial education. I see this, Jen, where a lot of clients want to share, here's what our revenue is, here's what our gross profit is. But many of their team members have never had even rudimentary accounting training. They just don't know what to mean with that. So they're bright people. So I just need to give them a 15-minute primer or an hour primer with some of this information in small little doses saying, hey, we talk about revenue is up by 12%, but notice over here, our expenses, our payroll expenses are up by 16%. That means our costs went up a little bit faster than what our revenue was. And you see over here in the profit margin, that's why it actually was a little bit lower because of these things. I'm curious for you, how have you dealt with clients that are considering or are sharing financial information to do it more effectively and more intelligently, more strategically? What comes up for you on that?
I think what comes up is telling them, you don't need to put your entire P&L up on a Zoom call. So let's start there. But letting them know kind of the top level metrics in terms of, what are our goals? Did we meet our goals? How far off were we from the goals? And the context behind that. So when they are meeting or exceeding their goals, why? What was working? Did they get more customers? Did they get higher rates? Did that marketing campaign really do the trick? Give them visibility into what's working. And when they didn't meet their goals, being honest about, we launched this marketing campaign, it didn't do as much as we thought. So next quarter, we're going to pivot and we're going to try this instead. So just starting high level to say, here's what we're aiming to do, and then give as much visibility as you're comfortable giving into, we're spending, a percentage of the business or this much money, whatever you're comfortable on marketing. We had a little less profit this past year because, as you all heard, we did a partnership with, such, and it was a rev share. So we had to kind of give away, that's all okay, I think, of letting them know why numbers are fluctuating a little bit. So that's what I would recommend.
So the strategic choice of what you're sharing. I'm also hearing that sometimes you're not sharing necessarily the full P&L. You're sharing bits and pieces of that, whether I share it as percentages. Your comment about, we had this kind of expense, marketing was this % of revenue, or if I share it as a raw number. Do we share it as a second order number? Hey, last year, this quarter, we were at, 472 orders. This year, we're at 504 orders. That's an improvement of 21%. And you guys should feel fantastic collectively. Our target is, how do we get that number to be 25% or higher by the end of the quarter? So I am sharing numbers, but the numbers might not be directly first order revenue profit numbers. And then the last one is I might share some numbers around expenses. Sometimes they're a little bit more comfortable as a way to introduce numbers and see how people respond to that. Hey, right now our target is to keep our staff costs to, I'll make up a number here, to how do we keep our staff costs to no more than 20% of revenue? And that's important. Right now we're running at about 24%, or a little bit overstaffed for what we need. Now, we're not going to make a change necessarily let anyone go, but I think as we continue to grow like we are, we're likely not to bring on a person until we get more in alignment before we make more hires for what we're doing. Information with progress. I know for inspiring, people get inspired when they see progress towards what they're collectively working towards. So sharing information can inspire that way. What are some other thoughts you have, whether it be sharing information or something completely different, that helps a business owner or business leader be more inspiring with her or his team?
I think it's about being authentic as well. So I don't think anyone likes the leadership that stands up with kind of their boilerplate PowerPoint robot speech. They want authenticity. They want to know, where are we going? And I'll kind of use my dance studio owner, that accreditation was a goal, but she was also transparent about what was happening in the business and that they weren't getting as many signups and, clients were graduating, going to college, and she needed to replace them and they were struggling. The economy was making it hard, and this was a discretionary thing. Dance and arts is discretionary when it comes to putting food on the table. They were losing and not getting that backfill. So being transparent, I think she was worried at first of sharing that with the people in her studio, but she was transparent too. And it inspired them. It did motivate them because they could impact that. They were out in the community. They could talk about the programs. She had a social media marketing person that was part-time that wanted to come up with social media campaigns and do some things on the website. So instead of scaring them, it inspired them, even the bad news. And so I say, be authentic, as well, because it can do some great things.
As you said that there, this idea that this authenticity, but you said also about, letting them help.
Yes.
And it's interesting. There's a really large and growing body of social psychology that talks about how to build relationships. And old school relationships, we build relationships by doing things for other people. And that certainly can help build a relationship. But over the last 15, 20 years, there's been a lot of experiments that talk about how when somebody does something for you, it actually now gives them, they actually like you and have more value to the relationship. Why? Because it causes cognitive dissonance. If I did something to help somebody else, it must have been for a reason. That reason must be that I like or find that person valuable or important. So asking your team is one of the most subtle, unsung heroes of how to build that relationship with your team. A, it's good for the business just because they have great value to offer. B, it's also important for the business because it does in fact build relationships. I wouldn't go to the trouble of doing this for the company if it wasn't a company I had some belief in or felt valuable to do that.
Yes.
Yeah. Authenticity. Authenticity for us as a person, right? I know one of the things we've done internally in Maui with some of the meetings one time I remember one of the managers brought up, everyone bring a picture of your pet to the next Zoom that we're going to do. And we're going to share these pictures. And people loved it. And I was surprised by that. Well, how could this make a difference? It seems like a silly way to start a meeting. But that was a highlight. They started an email thread, Jen, that they would send pictures of their pets and these very, doing funny things, and it helped morale. People were more engaged. And the best part about it was we noticed that when somebody needed help from one of their other teammates, it really did draw them together, because now they felt much more connected, even over something like their pets. What are other ways that you've seen to connect your team together?
So I want to share a quick example too that just happened recently. One of my clients within Maui has a few physical therapy offices, and the snowstorms hit, as we all know, several weeks ago. And I saw on her Big Rock report, our weekly report in the Maui system, that she made lemons out of lemonade with the snowman contest. And I asked her, I was like, what do you mean by that? And she said, the office is closed down. They couldn't get the patients in. They lost revenue. And she was upset, but she said, you know what? I'm going to do a snowman contest. So she had all of her workers that were stuck at home. It was like the pet, share your best snowman. And they had a contest with a reward. And she said people loved it because it was a depressing, upsetting time that they were like kind of losing these clients, but she turned lemons into lemonade. And I loved her attitude, and it really helped bring the team kind of together in a unique way. So I just wanted to share that example as
I think that's fantastic. Share your snowman. I have never heard that, but I love the idea, and it fits in with that. I think a lot of business owners mistakenly believe that the way that they inspire and engage is by offering money. And they start to do this process of micro payments. If you get X, I'll give you Y. If you get 2X, I'll give you 2Y. If you get 3X, and it's a dangerous thing. Offering money, it does work in some areas in some ways, but it's a dangerous form of incentive. Why? Because we can get it wrong. And going back to it is, if I'm doing it and getting paid for that micro result, oftentimes it actually then says, if I stop getting that micro payment, I say, well, then screw it. I'm not going to do the micro behavior. And so the theory of doing these micro incentives where, you're paying these small little pieces over time, too many of them, those were developed back in the times when people were doing manufacturing types of work. And it was very rote work that no one really thought about or enjoyed. And yes, it did work to shape some behavior. Obviously, there are times and places where incentive programs work, but I always tell clients, before I start throwing direct money at something, I ask, is there a way that I can try out incentives that are non-directly financial first to see what the impact on behavior is? Because the moment you put money to it, the risk of getting it wrong and the consequence of getting it wrong is much higher. And so not putting money at it could be putting a reward that's more of an acknowledgement, attention, visibility for their celebration of the progress, or it can be money that's intermediated. Hey, I go back to that example. We're gonna get a Sonos sound system for the plant in the back who's doing the work, or we're gonna have a party with a budget of $1,000 for a party. You could say, well, David, that is money. Yes, but by intermediating the money, by making it one step removed from money, I've watched that if something goes wrong, it's wrong that's contained. It doesn't spread. The spill, the toxic stuff is there. And if it works, it tends to be a safer way of trying. And I'm curious for you about incentives that you've watched business owners do. Any thoughts or tips about how might we use incentives more effectively, strategically, or just intelligently?
I'll go back to your comment of incentives don't always have to be financial in nature. So ones that I've seen be successful is offering development opportunities. So it could be training, and it could be internal training. It doesn't have to be expensive training, letting them upskill in some way, giving them ownership or leadership into other areas. Again, with my dance studio owner as an example, she would give some of her teachers the ability to run programs, for instance, run the spring recital. You take ownership, you create the program, come up with the theme. So just giving them developmental opportunities to grow was also an incentive as well that wasn't, kind of monetary in basis.
I love it. So training, development, giving them more responsibility and more autonomy. These are all ways that these are rewards that are non-financial.
Yes.
And so before we rush off and say, how do I pay for more? Let's ask, how can I help incentivize more non-financially first? Secondly, if I had a budget to incentivize that wasn't directly giving money. And then third, money is something to be very careful with. And it can work, but it can also backfire. I want to go to one last area here. So we've talked about engaging, we've talked about inspiring. I want to talk about aligning here. I'm going to ask you about some of your best thoughts to get teams, companies, departments, or the whole company aligned. You hinted at it earlier when you talked about things like having a common shared goal, vision that we all know we're working towards, sharing information. What are some of your other thoughts about how do we align our team?
You should definitely be having some check-in with the whole team, whole company, whether it's, a quarterly, all hands. It should be quarterly at the minimum, I'd say. But then stepping down kind of levels, I think a lot of teams go into isolation. The marketing team meets and the product team meets, but there's not a lot of alignment among the teams. So I suggest a couple of different things. I'll tell, my marketing leader, why don't you invite to your weekly marketing staff meeting, why don't you invite a person from the product team this week? Why don't you next week invite a person from the HR team? Just having that extra person coming in to hear what marketing's talking about, but also tell what they're doing. These little simple things, they love it. So that's an easy win. Another one is get everyone together to problem solve. Even as a business owner, you're faced with all kinds of challenges, or your marketing team might say, this campaign isn't delivering what we thought. Okay, well, let's not just have the marketing team brainstorm about it. Why don't you bring in a product and a salesperson into the meeting? Let them contribute to the brainstorming because they see it from a different point of view. So there's so many little ways to just get more brain power, different perspectives that align the team and also give visibility into what are the goals, not only of the business owner, but what is marketing trying to do? What is product trying to do? What is sales faced with? I think it could be really great to have alignment in those kind of ways.
Got it. I've got half a page of notes here. I want to come unpack them here. So one thing I'm hearing in alignment is this idea we have to fight against this disbursement, this silos, this isolation of various individuals or departments or pillars of the company. And so I know one thing that we can even generalize that we do inside of the Maui company with us is I look at, half of our team, maybe even 2/3 of our team never gets to talk with a business coaching client. And so one of the things we do when we get together once a month for a half-hour company-wide Zoom meeting, because we're a networked company, we're remote, we'll ask and invite a client to be on there for 5-7 minutes to share their story. And we tell the clients that we so appreciate you coming on here to share. You're looking at all these faces. You probably recognize your coach. Oh, that's Jen. She's my Maui coach. I know her. And you probably know Rich, who's the coaching director. And you might know several of the other coaches who led some of the small group sessions or were teaching at one of the workshops. And you probably know, your account manager. You say, oh, that's Maggie. I know her. And there's all these faces that they've never seen. And we tell the client, say, look, what you're sharing here is you're helping all those people who never get a chance to talk with a client to help them see how what they do has made a difference in your life and how important that is. And I can't tell you, Jen, the number of clients who've left that going, why aren't we doing this, right? I mean, whether they're a medical practice that has, 9 clinics and a lot of their, billing staff have never actually talked to a patient who's had a better life, or they're a contractor who might be a $20 million contracting business, but people in the office doing, billing or vendor management have never actually talked to one of their commercial clients and said, well, why did our tenant improvement job, we just did $1 million build out for you. How did it make your life better? How did it make a difference? Oh, wow. I see how what I ordered went into that job. I actually walked through it and made the connection, this idea. And I've got one more here, which is this idea of a day in the life. So you brought up something really important. Does the team that's in your production, whether it's a product or a service, even talk with the marketers? Do they talk with the salespeople? Not complain about them, right? Saying those darn marketers don't get us the right leads, or the salespeople aren't selling the right way, or our production people are you hear this kind of wrangling. And I think one of the best things we can do is sometimes to ask somebody to spend a day in the life of some other department. Maybe it's not the whole day, but maybe it's half a day that Julie can go and spend half a day with the sales team. And actually, if Julie's your part of your marketing team, let her actually go on a few sales calls. Let her see what it's like for the sales team when they're out there working leads that marketing helped to generate. Number one, the salespeople will so appreciate that. Wow, marketing really wants to hear what's going on. Number two, Julie will have such greater respect for the sales team about, it was scary. I saw, Margot ask for the sale and I was scared when she did that. Are we going to get rejected? Are they going to say yes? That part I like that. What you talked about visibilities and goals, but you said not just at the company level, but at the department level so that I can know what's going on in other departments. Speak a little bit more about that. I want to hear a little bit more detail about what you mean by that.
So one idea is, most departments are having some kind of weekly staff meeting or team meeting. So just start to invite, not everyone, but maybe once a month, you have the marketing, person come in and you have different people. It really, like I said, it introduces visibility for that marketing person to take back to the marketing team of, oh, wow, this is what I heard in product. But it gives product a little visibility because that marketing person is likely asking questions or sharing updates along their way. So that's one thing. I think another thing I've seen more established, businesses kind of level 2 going into level 3 do are QBRs, quarterly business reviews. And this does not need to be complicated or formal. Just a readout of here's everything that we said we were going to do this quarter. You can even do this with the action plan. Here's how it went. We launched it, we didn't, and why. And here's what we didn't do and why. And then here's what we're going to do this upcoming quarter. I love that quarterly flow among departments, to do those readouts. I think it introduces a lot of visibility across the company. It doesn't just have to be the leads. It could be at the team, with the whole team.
I love that idea here. So first of all, if you have someone sitting in on a meeting, they're going to take back what they learned or some of the insights they gained to give better visibility in this quarterly business review. It's interesting. I mean, you're talking about in generic terms, obviously in the Maui community, our coaching clients use the Maui app. And the newest version of the Maui app has a company level review that typically the owner or the number 2 in charge does that. It has department or pillar levels, your sales marketing review, your operations review, your finance review, and it prints up a simple, beautiful report. And you could easily send that PDF to other department heads so they can see, hey, at the end of the quarter, here's how we rated ourselves in the functional king responsibilities in our area. Here's what our top victories were. Here's what our top 2 lessons were and how we're going to apply them going forward. And here are other insights about what we're going to be focusing on for the coming quarter. I think that's a really interesting idea. And how easy it is, just if you're going to do the review anyways, the extra step of just sharing the review, not to create work for other people. Hey, you don't have to do anything. I'm sharing this with you because I want you to know what's going on in our area. And that's not an imposition. That's not like a homework thing that they have to do. It's something that makes their life better with that. Jen, I've got one last question I want to ask you. So we've been talking about this idea of inspiring and engaging and aligning. If you had any last 1 or 2 suggestions that someone could leave this episode of the Business Coach podcast with and apply to his or her company, what jumps to you as if you had any 1 or 2 final comments to them? What would it be about that would help them to inspire, engage, and or align their team?
Increasing transparency and communication at all. So a lot of the things that we talked about with authenticity. And the second is develop growth plans in many different ways in terms of leadership opportunities, projects worked on, ability to handle new and different tasks, certifications, training. There's lots of ways, but be having those conversations, make it very visible to your employees. Hey, I'm invested in you. Just as I want you to invest in us, I too am investing in you.
I love it. I love it. I'm going to share one that I have here, which is what's the impact of all this stuff, right? It is really easy to pick something to do with that. If retention of team members has been an issue, maybe it's as simple as once a quarter, just connecting with your best people first and then kind of working your way down. What's going on in their lives? I mean, we saw this a lot during the height of COVID. People had all kinds of life stress that they would project onto the business. And they said, well, I have to quit. I have to do something else. And it wasn't that the business was bad. It was that things in their life were so overwhelming that they felt the business role, their job was overwhelming when maybe it was 30% from the job, but 70% from the life. So, an easy step back then would have been for someone just to talk and say, hey, Rebecca, tell me a little bit more about what's going on in your life, just to connect with that. Oh, I can see how outside of the business world, outside of our office, that's got to be tough at times, struggle. Thank you for sharing that. So how can I pick one thing, one small thing, that's something that you shared, Jen, or what I shared, to just apply to improve communication or engagement or alignment And next quarter, maybe I add one more thing. I don't have to change and put everything into practice all at once, but I would really encourage anyone in our audience to pause 2 minutes after this episode is over, and we're about done here. Pick one thing that you took from today. And there were dozens of things that Jen, you and I shared here that were concrete, practical things. Pick one, apply it in your business. Maybe it was you're going to bring in a customer once a quarter to come on site to talk with your people, or maybe you're going to take your people on a field trip to go on site to visit with a past customer and to see the impact of what they did and produced on that person. And then just do one thing. Jen, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your experiences with us here at the Business Coach. It's been a joy and a pleasure. I can't wait to do this again in the future. Maybe I'll get you back somewhere down the road several months from now for another episode. What do you think? I'm just putting you on the spot.
Absolutely. I'm game. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. All right. So to all of our audience, this is a time for you to pick one thing, take 2 minutes, pick one thing. And how are you going to apply it? Something to inspire, engage, or retain your people, something to align your people, one thing that you're going to apply here this quarter. And drop us a line. I would love to hear and share what your insight was. As always, you can send questions in. We'd be happy to do that. Put them in the comments, send them in the email. And thank you for being part of the Maui community. Bye, everybody.